tonight's musical guest, well, he was just one of the most popular singers and songwriters of the 1960s. He had hits like Sheila, Jam Up and Jelly Tight, and his classic song, Dizzy, that was #1 for 4 weeks in a row back in 1969. He has now shared his amazing life story in this memoir. I just got finished reading it and loved it. It's called From Cabbagetown to Tinseltown and Places in Between. Would you join me in giving a very warm welcome to the one and only Tommy Roe? This is a big deal for me.
Oh, it's a big deal for me.
Well, I played your records
fan.
when I was a 14-year-old disc jockey. You helped me get through school, man. Thank you.
Oh, listen, I started when I was 14. I wrote Sheila when I was 14.
You know, it's going to be kind of crazy. Next month, September of 22, is the 60th anniversary of that song being certified gold. #1 song, your first big #1. And it almost didn't make it, right?
It almost didn't make it, that's true. Actually, when the record was released, the A-side was called Save Your Kisses, and Sheila was the B-side. And so they played Save Your Kisses for a while on the radio, and it went nowhere.
Yeah.
And Buddy Dean, a DJ in Baltimore, back in those days, DJs could play more or less what they wanted to.
Yeah.
Well, he decided he'd flip the record over and play the B-side. He did, and as we used to say in the old days, the phones lit up. So everybody started calling and requesting Sheila, and that's how that record broke.
And Buddy Dean ended up being one of my very dear friends. I spoke at his funeral when he passed away in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, where he owned radio stations. Who would have thought that connection?
Who would have thought?
Now, here's something that blows me away. In the spring of 1963, you're headlining a tour in the UK. And they get these guys to open for you that are kind of a, you know, up-and-coming band. They were called...
They're a cover band.
The Beatles.
The Beatles.
They opened for Tommy Roe. Was that crazy?
I tell you, that was one of the most interesting experiences in my life, because I'll tell you why. The Beatles only opened for 2 artists. Well, 3, because Chris Montez and I were headlining that show.
Yeah.
But they opened for Chris and I, and they opened for Roy Orbison. And that's the only American artist that they ever opened for. But what happened on both of those tours is Beatlemania was just taking off. And to make the shows work, they had to flip the order around. Because the Beatle fans were just, you know, they made everything so chaotic that you couldn't go on stage after the Beatles. So...
You ended up opening for them after they were supposed to open for you.
I ended up opening for them after the show started, because they were just Beatlemania. You don't want to, artists out there, if you're listening, don't ever get caught up in any kind of mania.
But you traveled on a bus with those guys, the 4 of them, and you and Chris, for several months. I mean, how many people had that experience? Nobody.
Well, Roy and me, and that's it.
Yeah.
And, you know, John Lennon used to have a Gibson guitar on the bus. And Sheila was a big hit in England, and I had to come up with a follow-up to Sheila. So on the bus, I would borrow John's guitar to write songs, you know, and he'd let me borrow it. Everything was cool. And so I wrote Everybody on that tour on John Lennon's guitar. Well, that guitar just sold at auction for $2.5 million.
You should have stolen it.
Well,
you had a shot at it. Come on,
that's
Tommy.
Right.
You could have stolen that guitar.
Well, it's worth at least 3.5 now that I wrote Everybody on it.
There you go. Absolutely. What an incredible story. I tell you, honestly, I could talk to you for hours and hours. I love the book. It is such a great, just really trip down memory lane for all of us rock and roll fans from the 60s.
So much.
And who love Tommy Roe and love the great music that you put together. We didn't bring him here just to talk and talk even about the book. You know we're going to do music. So, Keith, while we get set up and do some music, why don't you tell the viewers how they can get Tommy's music and their own copy of this book, From Cabbagetown to Tinseltown and Places in Between.
Now, to learn more about Tommy Roe, his music, and his memoir, go to Huckabee.tv. While you're there, watch a digital exclusive performance of his classic, Sweet Pea.